One of the themes that's come out of our research has been concerns about conflict. This has brought so many things to the fore, and elders meetings and board meetings and small group, in all kinds of ways, people are finding themselves a bit at odds with each other. And the reality is that conflict is a very normal human thing. The challenge is, when conflict hits, will we make it something that is life-giving or something that's life-threatening? So we've invited a very special person to speak for a few minutes about conflict resolution. Lori Ann Shaw is the director of Duncum Center Solutions, which is a unit of Abilene Christian University based out of Dallas. She's an expert in conflict management, teaches in a graduate program that we have at ACU on the subject. And so we're going to turn to her now for a few minutes to talk to us about conflict mediation or conflict resolution.
Hi, friends. Both of my grandmothers, my aunt, and my mother-in-law have had that doctor's office moment when a physician would sit across from her and tell her she has breast cancer. I expect that most of you know someone who's faced that day too, or likely some of you yourselves have. I don't know all of the possible reactions to a cancer diagnosis. I can imagine a lot of different roads that led people to that day. I can imagine people choosing their loved ones to go with them to brace themselves for the news, be it wonderful or terrible. I can hear the calls following the appointments telling others the news. And in those first moments when the person is alone, I wonder if they first think about the future or the past. Do they go numb or make a to-do list? Eventually, once each patient's mind stops racing and finally kicks back into gear, it's time to think about the future she will live into. She has to consider treatment. Does she want to live? How does she want to live? Will it be a fight? Will it be awful? Will it be worth it? Most of our churches have faced and will face again our doctor's office moment. Some are facing it now. The church has cancer. The cancer could be a tradition that we have outgrown or harm that we have caused a group of people. At that moment of realization in the doctor's office, we have to ask ourselves a few questions, those same questions as other cancer patients. Do we want to live? Are we willing to undergo treatment, even if it makes us hurt? Even if it makes us feel weak and weary? Some people who love us dearly will tell us the treatment is worse than the disease. They will tell us that we look fine, we feel fine, we are fine. They'll tell us to get a second opinion, and many of them will encourage us to substitute every expert opinion with more convenient ones. But church, we know better. Our diagnosis stings bitterly when we are hopeful by nature without being naive. A voice tells us to be shrewd as snakes and harmless as doves. A voice tells us to test everything and cling to good. A voice tells us to be content, well-fed, or hungry. In church, these cancers, when they come to our awareness, conflict is central to our body's journey to healing. But most of us view conflict, especially at church, as something to be avoided and ignored. We view the act of conflict as the cancer when it really is the treatment for the cancer. And this makes sense because many of us have experienced church conflict that resulted in disconnection and pain. As a result, we move away from conflict, or at the very least, enter conflict with the goal of restoring the status quo. We do this to protect our relationships. But the fear of conflict often holds us hostage from addressing the issues that matter most. In his book, Little Book of Conflict Transformation, John Letterock explains, we often experience conflict as a disruption to the natural flow of our relationships. We notice or feel that something is not right, a symptom here or there. And suddenly we find ourselves more attentive to every interaction. The relationship becomes complicated, not as easy or smooth as it once was. No longer do we take things at face value. Instead, we spend time and energy interpreting and reinterpreting what every interaction means. Our communication becomes difficult, requiring more and more intentional effort, and we find it harder to really hear what others are saying, unless, of course, they agree with us. We just cannot easily comprehend what the other person is up to. Our very physiology changes as our feelings move from uneasiness to anxiety to outright pain. In such situations, we often experience a growing sense of urgency, leading to a deeper and deeper frustration as the conflict progresses, especially if no end is in sight. These are the symptoms that something is wrong. In these moments, if someone uninvolved in the situation were to ask us, "What is this conflict about?" we would usually explain our latest symptoms, where we had the most pain or discomfort most recently. Our tendency is to view conflict by focusing on the immediate presenting symptoms. We give our energy to reducing pain by looking for a quick solution, when what we really need to do is go in for a full diagnosis and better analyze the underlying causes. So what if we completely changed the way we approach conflict altogether? You may have heard of conflict resolution, but I'd like to introduce this other framework, conflict transformation. The transformational approach to conflict uses this guiding question: how do we end something not desired and build something that we do desire? Here's the treatment plan from John Letterock in his book, Little Book of Conflict Transformation. First, we look at the present. Here we need to understand the presenting symptoms and see what's driving them. And this is where we want to do a full analysis of the current situation. We're looking for relational and historical patterns from which these symptoms arise. And identifying those patterns will help us understand why the symptoms are continuing. Second, we look at the future. And this requires our greatest imagination and creativity as we ask, what do we hope to build? What would we like to see happen? What do we want to create, and what does full healing look like in this situation? How could we be more like God? Third, we develop change processes, and this is where we determine how will we get from the present to that future. Remember, we're simultaneously ending something not desired and building something new. So the change processes should be planned accordingly. They should both ease the current symptoms and construct the future we've imagined. The transformational approach to conflict may be painful, but it is not life-threatening. In fact, it makes conflict a life-giving motor of change that keeps relationships and traditions in our churches honest, alive, and responsive to God's leading. Carried out in the spirit of justice, mercy, and humility, conflict is the medicine we need to fight the cancers we face. Health is on the other side of our illness. Let's seize the doctor's office moments to renew our body and be transformed. Church, I love you and I believe in your goodness and wisdom. Take the Hippocratic oath to do the church no harm in administering the medicine of conflict transformation as we follow the great physician. There are resources to help you. Conflict and the change it brings is important enough that one should dedicate him and herself to learning to do it well. It is, as my grandmother would say, as serious as cancer.